Hey everyone, welcome to the June 22nd, 2025 edition of the East Central Ohio Technology User Club monthly program meetings. This month, we have a guest speaker. His name is Alan German. He is the executive meeting coordinator for the Ottawa PC Users Group, and he's here to help us talk about the end of life for Windows 10, which happens later this year. I'm not going to spoil the exact date. I'll let him share that. But he's going to talk to us about what the implications are and what our various options are, moving beyond Windows 10. So, Alan, we're glad you're here. Thank you. Take it away when you're ready, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Adam, and good afternoon, everyone from the Great White North. Just bring up my screen here. So you should now have my presentation.
Yep.
There it is.
Okay, so Windows 10 is reaching end of life, so the question is, what are we going to do about it? I made a slide here saying you don't need to take notes. For those of you who want to, you can download the presentation as a PDF file from on my club's website, or I have sent it to John Kennedy, so he's prepared to distribute it, I believe. And I'm always open to questions, so as we go along, I'm sure there'll be questions during the presentation. But if you have any questions after today's meeting, you can always get hold of me at my email address there. So I'll bring that slide back up at the end. So if you forget my name or whatever, you can pick it up later. And John always knows how to get hold of me, so you can always go through John to find me. Okay, so end of life. So the magic date is going to be October the 14th this year. And in practice, that means that we will not get any further Windows updates. And so that probably means, well, it definitely means there'll be no more security updates, which are the patches that we get every Patch Tuesday. There won't be any driver updates, so hardware may become a problem. And you will not see any new features in Windows 10. And if you have been using the technical support services, then Microsoft will not be providing those any longer for Windows 10. So Windows 10 is basically going away. The question is, what are we going to do about it? So I actually developed this presentation based on a series that I gave to my club's weekly Q&A sessions. And I started this on October the 2nd of 2024. So we had 12 months to go. And my advice was, don't panic. You've got lots of time to decide. And even now, you've got 4 months. So there's still lots of time to think about your options and what's going to be best for you. And we don't have to panic because Windows 10 is going to continue on its merry way. As usual, we'll get all the security updates. And we don't have to worry until October the 15th, I guess. However, what we do need to do is start thinking about options. And what are the options that we can do on, or preferably before, Windows 10 reaches end of life? And the first thing that Microsoft would really love you to do is to update to Windows 11. However, as we'll see in a few minutes, that's if possible. There are some hardware restrictions which mean that you may not be able to upgrade to Windows 11. You could just keep on merrily using Windows 10. If you think about when Windows 7 reached end of life, how many people were still, and probably still are, using Windows 7. So the operating system doesn't stop just because Microsoft ends support for it. And Microsoft is offering extended support, although it's very limited, and you have to buy it. And we'll talk about that later. By the same token, third-party support, which again is available for purchase. And then the final option I get, well, not the final option, but the next option is if you really can't upgrade Windows 10 to 11, then maybe you have to think about buying a whole new computer, which will come with Windows 11 installed. That's actually the penultimate option, because there's one other option, which was the title of my series for my club, Trade Up to Linux. If you can't use Windows 11, then what you could do is use Linux, and you can either switch to Linux completely, or you can kind of hedge your bets and use both operating systems in a dual boot mode. And we'll talk about that later on. And you don't have to take my word for all of this. There are some online people with good credentials. This is Dave Plummer. He's a retired Microsoft engineer from the kind of Windows 95 days. He has this YouTube channel called Dave's Garage, where he talks about a lot of different computer technology. And in this particular one, he's talking about Windows end of life. And in my view, he has quite a balanced approach. He talks about updating to Windows 11, buying new machines, running it as is. And however, what he does say is that it's going to be like, in future, it's going to be like standing on an ice pad, a frozen lake, and the ice is going to crack eventually, and something, i.e. you or your computer system, is likely to fall through. So he foresees that there are going to be technical issues if you just continue trying to use Windows 10. The other person I quite like on YouTube is Christopher Barnett. He has a channel called Explaining Computers. Christopher is a retired university academic from the UK. He has a really interesting presentation style. It's kind of very deadpan and very dry humor, but a lot of really good information. And this is his latest, well, actually, it's last week's video. He puts out a video every week. Last week, he was talking about Windows 10 end of life, and he had a really interesting slide. This is looking at the Windows 10, Windows 11 market share over the last year. And you can see that Windows 10 has been steadily dropping and Windows 11 has been steadily rising until the last couple of months, where everything seems to have plateaued. And really interesting, Windows 10 has a 53% market share, whereas Windows 11 only has a 43% market share. So if you haven't upgraded to Windows 11 yet, or you can't upgrade to Windows 11, you're not on your own. There are probably hundreds of thousands of computers worldwide that are in the same boat. They're still using Windows 10, and maybe they're thinking about what to do. The interesting question, of course, is how many of those are not capable of upgrading to Windows 11. And for those who can't do that, then he talks about all the options which we just talked about, from doing nothing to maybe dual booting with Linux and buying a new computer in there somewhere. So let's go back and take a look at some of our options. So first of all, can I update to Windows 11? And if you look at Microsoft's website, one of the things you'll find is that there are minimum system requirements. So if you want to run Windows 11, then you have to have some specific hardware. And the second thing Microsoft says is that if your computer right now doesn't meet the actual requirements, then Microsoft doesn't recommend installing Windows 11. People have found workarounds how to do that, but Microsoft don't recommend it. So basically, do it at your own risk, I guess. Now, if you're in that fortunate group that can install Windows 11, then it's really easy. You just go to the Start menu, go to Settings, Update and Security, go to Windows Update, check for updates, and bingo, you'll be able to download Windows 11 using this installation assistant and follow the bouncing ball and install Windows 11. Now, the question is, what about the rest of us? The rest of us get messages like this, and when we look at Windows Update, get ready for Windows 11, check the hardware requirements. And when you do that, it will tell you all about your system, what the processor is, how much memory you have, storage, etc., etc. But if you look in the top right-hand corner there, Microsoft has some software called PC Health Check. And basically, you can download and install this. It will actually automatically do the inventory of your system and decide whether you're able to upgrade to 11 or not. And so if you click on that, then you get this option to download the Health Check app. And it comes as an MSI file, which is an installable executable program. So when you run that, then you must accept the terms of the license agreement, because you're actually installing this new Microsoft software on your computer. You tell it to install, off it goes, and it sets things up, and eventually it will say it's finished. And by default, it will, or maybe I have to check this window, I don't remember, open Windows PC Health Check to actually run the software and see what happens. And when you do that, then it comes back and gives you all kinds of options here in terms of backing up and storage capacity. But what we're interested in right here is this health check, and check our computer right now and tell us what's going on. So let's click on that. And this is I was horrified to find that my brand new laptop, I was horrified to find out that my brand new laptop was 10 years old. And it clearly fails the test. It doesn't meet the Windows 11 system requirements. And if I blow that window up there, you can see that it fails a couple of different things. A TPM and a CPU both have problems. So let's think about TPMs for a second. A TPM is a trusted platform module. And it's basically a chip which supports cryptography and security. And Microsoft are insisting that Windows 11 PCs have this TPM module available and activated to enhance the security of the system. You want to know more about that, then again, Dave's Garage has this video where he talks exclusively about the trusted platform modules. If you don't know what it does, why you need it, again, he explains in great detail how it actually benefits the security of the system.
Am I allowed to butt in?
Yes, certainly. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. If today I decide to buy a new one, can I tell how many years old the new one that I buy tomorrow is?
If I understood what you said, sorry. Windows basically offers 10 years of support for their operating systems. So if you buy a machine today with Windows 11, then it's probably good for the best part of at least 10 years. And the chances are, the next version will be supported by your hardware. Maybe. I mean, that's been the situation for Windows forever until Windows 10, when suddenly these hardware requirements came in, and some machines won't upgrade between 10 and 11.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to hear.
Okay, I would think that Windows 11 computers are good for at least 10 years, and they'll probably run Windows 12 and beyond, no problem. Okay, so TPM is a problem on my machine, and my machine is a laptop, this one, and I'm not sure if I could even install a TPM module in my laptop. Well, the next problem is the CPU doesn't meet the magic requirements. So if we go and look at that, then you'll find that the website here, Microsoft's website, system requirements, has a list of approved central processing units. In other words, the chip that runs your entire computer. And if you go to that list of supported processors, you'll find that There's all kinds of operating systems which are available here, so we need to expand the table, and we basically have to find out what version of Windows we're running and then which type of processor. And then we can scroll down this list to find the information that fits our particular machine. So what we need to do is go to Settings and System, About, and look up Windows specifications, and it will give us both the computer specifications in terms of the chip and also the specifications for Windows. And if I pull out those two things for my computer, you'll find that I have a Core i7 computer, and in particular, I have a 4010U CPU. So Core i7 4510. And Windows 10 Home is running version 22H2. So both of those two things, i7 4510, Windows 10 22H2. Now I can go back to that list and I can scroll down until I find Windows 10 22H2. And you remember my chip was a Core i7, which is an Intel processor. So I need to look at this list here for Intel processors. And if I do that, again, I get a huge list of processors. And if I scroll down through the i5s, eventually I hit the i7s and keep going. And what I want to do is trying to find 4510. And you notice that we jump from 1470 to 5500, and these are in numerical order. So there is no Core i7 4510. So that's why my machine isn't supported. And just to double check on that, if I, on this web page, if I do a Control and F for find, then I can type in 4510U, look for this CPU number, and you'll find that I get 0 hits. So that CPU is not on that particular list. So there we go. I have a TPM missing, and my CPU is basically too old as far as Microsoft are concerned. I can go down here and say, see all the results. It will tell me that, well, it supports secure boot, and I've got memory and lots of disk space and stuff like that. So let's learn more about the system requirements. And now I get this warning message. Basically, you're out of luck. This PC will not run Windows 11. And now I can shop for new PCs. That would be exciting, wouldn't it? Or I can look at my other options. I know now that my computer, and this isn't just one computer, I actually have 3 computers that I use. I have a laptop, a desktop, and a hybrid computer that I use as a tablet. And I've got a couple of other computers which are essentially backups. And of course, they're all old because I said my new laptop is 10 years old. This is the one that failed the test here. So all of the other machines which are older aren't going to upgrade to Windows 11 either. So I have to think about what to do in terms of, am I going to keep using Windows 10? Do I purchase extended support, third party? Do I just buy a new computer, or should I be trading up to Linux? So which is the best option? Well, which is the best option for you, or which is the best option for me? It all depends, doesn't it? So let's have a look at some of these options in a bit more detail. So Windows 10 is going to run out of support from Microsoft, but the operating system will still work. However, if just running Windows 10, as we always have, is basically not recommended. Your machine is almost certainly going to be on the internet, and it's going to be a target for hackers and could very easily be compromised. And that's because Windows is not going to provide you with any further security updates after October the 14th. It's not clear to me anyway whether you're going to get antivirus updates for, say, Windows Defender or some of the third-party antivirus suites, whether they'll keep supporting Windows 10, who knows. Microsoft says you're not going to get any technical support. If you have a problem, there'll be no troubleshooting available. If your computer's on the internet, which we're all using email and web surfing browsers, then you're going to be vulnerable to attack. And my guess is that hackers are going to put a lot of effort into finding machines that are still running Windows 10. And once they find some backdoors, then it'll be open season on unprotected hardware. And as Dave Plummer was indicating, eventually things will start to break. Hardware will get updated and it won't run on Windows 10, or it won't run properly. Software may have the same kind of problem. You might have problems finding hardware that'll work. Software may break. And Dave Plummer says that system performance is likely to decline as things basically start to fall off the edge of the cliff. So running Windows 10 as usual is probably not a good idea. How about just installing Windows 11, even though the computer that you're running doesn't actually support it? Again, remember, Microsoft didn't recommend that. And again, you've got the same sorts of problems. What kind of are security updates and antivirus updates going to be available for machines running Windows 11 that aren't supported? And you're almost certainly not going to get any technical support from Microsoft. And same kind of thing, you may have hardware and software problems. You're on old hardware, old software, Windows 10 software, and you may not be able to get Windows 11 versions that work properly. So basically, this to me it's a great unknown, and personally, I'm not terribly enthused about doing that one either. I did mention that Microsoft are offering extended support, so they're calling it an Extended Security Update Program, ESU, for users of Windows 10. And this has been announced a little while ago. There are some requirements. You have to be running the version 22H2 of Windows 10 in order to be eligible for the program. It's only going to provide security updates, so the patches that you get with Patch Tuesday for the operating system. If they update the features in Windows 11, then those won't be brought over to the extended support for Windows 10. And if there are bugs found, then they won't fix those either. Once again, there's going to be no technical support. And this is a specific ESU program for consumers. There is one for commercial operations, which is much more expensive. And they say the program enrollment is going to be available closer to October 2025. But the bottom line is right here that the consumer version is only going to be available for 1 year, and it's for a cost of $30. And that's $30 US, I think. So again, you pay your $30, you get the extended support, but you're really just putting off the evil day. I mean, what happens now is that you pay your $30 and Windows end of life now becomes October the 14th, 2026. So you have another year to think about what you're going to do, because as of now, that ESU program ends after the first year. There's another option, similar, third-party developers are offering security patches. One of them is called Zero Patch, and they say that they're going to deliver what they call micro patches. So anytime they find a vulnerability in the operating system, they will develop and deliver a micro patch which will fix the problem. And their agent will be running continually in the background and installing stuff as and when it becomes available. Again, you need 22H2 of Windows 10, and the Zero Patch version is scheduled to come out in October of this year to coincide with end of life. This time it's an annual fee of basically 25 euros, which is $37. That's $37 Canadian. So that's $1.25 US, I think, isn't it? No, it's more like $27 US. You do have a huge discount on Canadian, but perhaps not as much as I first said. So about $27 per year US. Now the question is, are you going to trust a non-Microsoft entity to provide patches for Microsoft software? My understanding is Microsoft is a closed proprietary system. So how they know how to patch it, I'm not sure. So to me, this is another great unknown and doesn't appeal to me greatly. So the next option we have is just buy a new computer. So this is clearly a real fix. You buy a new computer, it will come with Windows 11 installed. However, the downsides are that you have to buy the new computer, so there's a certain cost involved there. And is all your software that you're running going to be compatible with Windows 11? Probably. I mean, most things are. That shouldn't be a problem. However, for me, the real problem is, what are you going to do with the old machine? You just have to, hundreds of thousands, well, tens of thousands of people are probably just going to jump these old PCs and they'll all go to e-waste. When, in my view, I mean, all my computers are running, nothing's failed yet, which is why I haven't bought a new one. So they're completely serviceable and they work really well. So I really object to having to send good hardware to e-waste. So what's that final option that we talked about? Trading up to Linux. So I think your club is probably like mine. Most people are Windows users. In my club, almost everybody is a Windows user, and there's a very few people actually running Linux. And so if you're not familiar with Linux, then, what is Linux? And people say, well, Linux it's really difficult and complicated, and it's really only for computer geeks. Well, no, it isn't anymore. That was in the really bad old days, long time ago. Now it's a modern operating system, and there's really no difficulty in switching from Windows to Linux. They say Linux is hard to learn. Well, it really isn't. If you choose the right distro, it turns out it's very much similar to Windows. They say, well, you have to use the command line. You need to use a terminal. You have to type commands to do everything. Well, no, most of the time, you never need to touch the terminal. And everything you do is pretty well run through a graphical user interface, a GUI. And then they say, well, the applications are different. You don't have your favorite Windows applications. Well, that's not necessarily true. I mean, some Linux applications are different, but they work just as well. And I'd argue that some of them work a lot better. Some are the same depending on what applications you use. I mean, if you use LibreOffice, then that's a cross-platform application. So the software that you're running in Windows is almost the same software that you can run in Linux. And then finally, there are some programs that you can run directly in Linux. You use some special software to do that, but many programs will run on a Linux platform. Now, that's not to say that they all do. There are certainly some that don't, and we'll talk about those as we go along. So what is Linux? Well, it's a free open source operating system. And the neat thing is it comes bundled with a whole batch of applications. So these are called distributions. So you get the operating system and all the applications wrapped up in a package which you install. And so it's really easy to install. They have an installer, just like Microsoft, where it's a wizard and you just answer the questions and it installs very easily. And it's also easy to use, but it is different. It's not Windows. It can look like Windows, it can act a bit like Windows, but there's a learning curve to some of the things that you would like to do in Linux. And again, depending on the distro and the desktop that you choose, it can look a lot like Windows. And one of the neat things is that you can run Linux and Windows on the same hardware in a dual boot mode. So by default, I boot my machine into Linux for my so-called normal use. And for most people, the available applications in the distro may be enough for you. And as I said, you can install some Windows programs to run on the Linux desktop. So I can run Linux, I can run certain Windows programs on my Linux box. If I run into a package that won't run on Linux, and I can't install it using the special software, then in my dual boot system, when I boot my computer, I come to a menu and I can choose to boot into Windows instead of booting into Linux. So now I can run my very specific Windows application in actual Windows. And I can do that by turning off the internet, so I don't have to, my Windows box, my dual boot Windows isn't presented to the outside world so that hackers can get to it. I run my Windows box essentially offline, or at least I will once Windows 10 runs out of support. So that's essentially going to be my strategy going forwards. My machines already are dual booted, and that's exactly what I do. Most of the time I run Linux. Occasionally I'll run Windows, but when Windows 10 runs out of support, then I will basically disable the internet on the Windows side and run Windows offline. All right, so for you people who don't run Linux, how would you go about installing Linux? I'm going to suggest that you use a distro called Linux Mint. And the reason for that is that Linux Mint is really well supported, has a very active user community. There's lots of how-to tutorials and videos and user forums. If you have problems, you can find out how to fix things. And it's also very much like Windows. The version I'm going to suggest is a Windows-like desktop. Basically, what you do is create a bootable USB. Most people these days will have computers that can boot from a USB flash drive. Or if you can't do that, then you can use a DVD, an optical drive. Typically, you will boot the computer from this USB, a live USB they call it, and your computer boots into Linux directly from the USB. It doesn't touch your computer's hard drive. So now you can run Linux directly from this USB, and you can check out, does it support your video card, your audio card? You know, does your printer, does your hardware work with Linux? You can have a look at these applications that I said come bundled in the distro. So you've got Office applications, internet applications, audio video applications, all kinds of stuff. You can check those out in the live USB without having to install it. So that kind of checks out that everything's going to work, and you're happy with the kind of material that's coming with the distro that you've chosen. So once you've done that, then you can install Linux in this dual boot mode so that you have the best of both worlds, as it were. And then you have this magic menu called Grub, which allows you to boot into Linux or Windows when you fire up the machine. And the software that you need to run Windows programs in Linux is called Wine, or possibly Play on Linux, which is essentially a front end for Wine. And we'll take a quick look at that later on. So here we are. This is my Linux desktop, and you can see that on my desktop I'm actually running Microsoft Word, and I've got a newsletter article open here in Microsoft Word running on Linux. So it is possible to run Windows apps on Linux. And if you look at the way I've set up my desktop, as I said, that's very Windows-like. You've got a taskbar down the bottom, which Linux uses for some reason, called the panel. But it has some quick start applications on the left, and it's got some icons on the right with all kinds of things there. We've got some icons on the desktop, and I've spread those around in various categories that make sense to me. So it's very Windows-like type environment. Now, I'm big on giving people detailed instructions on how to do things. And this is my Linux North blog. And I've got this page here, which is running Linux Mint from a live USB. So it tells you everything you need to know in great detail with words and pictures and step-by-step instructions on downloading Mint, creating the USB, and checking things out on the live USB. I've been running Linux for almost 20 years, and I started this blog in 2011. So the blog's been running for 14 years. And what I use this for is, you remember I said sometimes you have problems with Linux. So when I have a problem and I fix it, I basically document it on this blog. So I have kind of a maintenance log built in that I can refer to. So if my grub blows up, my grub menu blows up, I can go to this search box up here and I can type in grub, and it will show me some blog postings that I did a while ago, how to recover from problems with grub. So this is my how to play around with a live USB and figure things out. So just quickly, there are kind of 4 requirements. You need to download an ISO file for your distro of choice. And I said I chose Linux Mint. And when I made the slide, it was 22. Now the latest one is called Shia. It's version 22.1. But the process is exactly the same. So there's no difference other than the change in version number. So you need to download the ISO file. You need a USB drive, and it needs to be 4 gigabytes or more because this download is essentially for a DVD. So you need either an empty USB drive or something that you can overwrite, because when you flash the ISO file to the USB drive to make it into a bootable drive, it will blow away anything that's already on the drive. You need some software to actually do that flashing, and one of the programs you can use is called Balena Etcher. It's a really easy way to create bootable USB drives. And then finally, if you're going to use a USB drive, you need to know how to boot into the USB drive. And you can do that very easily in Google. Just say boot for a Dell Inspiron 15 from USB, and it will tell you exactly what key combination you need to do that. So basically, if you follow my instructions, you'll end up on the Linux Mint page. If you download by default, you get the Cinnamon edition. There are different desktops available, but I recommend Cinnamon because it's very like Windows. Once you've downloaded the ISO file, then you can use Balena Etcher, and this is kind of the home page for that. So you basically select the file, the ISO file that you've just downloaded. You select the USB flash drive that you're going to write to, and you hit flash, and it writes the bootable drive. So a really easy process once you download the file to actually create the USB drive. So here's an example of finding out how to boot my Inspiron from USB, and the first hit says press F12 after you power on the machine. And when you do that, then you get you're going to get some menu like this. This is the grub menu, the Grand Unified Bootloader menu. And you can see it gives you all kinds of different options. By default, start Linux Mint 22 in those days, Cinnamon, the 64-bit edition. So I just choose the default, say go, and off it goes. Now, be patient, because when you're booting from a USB, it's much slower than probably booting from your SSD that you're normally used to on your computer. The USB drive is a slower device. So you'll see a whole bunch of black screens, and every now and then this green and white logo will pop up. But eventually, as I say here, the Linux desktop will load in all its splendor. And here it is in all its splendor. You can see that Linux users typically are very minimalist type people. You don't get an awful lot in a default desktop, but there's a lot of stuff under the hood here. And in particular, if you go down to that bottom left-hand corner and hit this Linux Mint logo, then it pops up this menu. And we'll come back to that later on, where we can try all kinds of stuff out. But basically, here's some of the categories, and in each category, you've got all kinds of options, and that's how you check things out. But let's take a look at this desktop, and this icon here in the top left-hand corner says Install Linux Mint. Remember that wizard? So this is launching the installation wizard. So what do I say next? All right, you double click on that icon on the desktop, it launches the wizard. So now you go through a whole bunch of screens where it's requiring various inputs. A lot of them are basically self-explanatory. You know, like the first one right here, by default, the language is going to be English. So if that's what you want, you just say continue, and off you go. So most of them are easy. You just answer the questions as you see fit. Some of them are a bit more tricky, and you need a bit of explanation maybe. So again, going back to my Linux North blog, here's another page. This time it's telling you in great detail how to install Linux Mint as a dual boot system. So we'll end up with just making space on the hard drive, squeezing, shrinking the Windows partition a bit, creating some free space, and then installing Linux into that free space on the hard drive. So now we have Windows and Linux both available on the hard drive, and the grub menu is going to allow us to choose between those two options. Right, so here's one of the things where you maybe want to think about it a little bit. So you get to this screen here, which is wireless, connecting the computer to a Wi-Fi network. And I'm saying, all right, connect to this network. And then I've chosen here this network called Duck Pond, which is my local area network on the router. And now it wants to know my Wi-Fi password. So this is so it enables Wi-Fi on the router. So I've got Wi-Fi available for the installation. But even more importantly, it remembers the password. So when I run Linux, when I've installed Linux and I run it normally, I've already established the password for my Wi-Fi system, and Wi-Fi will be available without me doing anything. So that's quite an important thing to do when you're installing Linux for the first time. This is a really weird one. Do I want to unmount partitions that are in use? And you notice here it says the installer has detected the following disks have mounted partitions: device SDC. And do I want the installer to unmount that? If I leave them mounted, I won't be able to create, delete, or resize partitions on the drive. Well, if we're Windows users, we've probably got no clue what this means, device/SDC. I'll give you the magic. The secret is SDC is the flash drive from which we're installing Linux. So we don't want to be able to create or delete or resize partitions on that flash drive. So we're quite happy to say, yes, unmount it. If you say no, don't unmount it, it actually doesn't make any difference. The installation will proceed as normal. But basically, that's just telling you that the flash drive is mounted. All right, this is actually quite an important one. Where do you want to install Linux? Now, personally, I always install Linux on the same hard. I've only got one hard drive. So I install Linux on the same hard drive as Windows. So what I want to do is this option right here, which I think it chooses by default, install Linux Mint alongside Windows Boot Manager. Right? What I don't want to do is the second one here, erase the disk and install Linux Mint. Because if I use that one, if I erase the disk, it will blow away everything on the current hard drive, including Windows, all the applications, and all my data files. So I definitely don't want to do that. I want to do this install alongside, so I get both operating systems on my hard drive. When I choose that option, the installer by default decides, all right, he's got like a 250 gig hard drive. It's using about 180 gig of space on the Windows drive. So he's got around, 70 or 80 gig, which aren't being used. So I'll kind of split that in half, and I'll give 40 gig almost to Linux Mint, and I'll leave 40 gig of empty space on Windows. So it's kind of taken the available space that isn't being used and kind of split it into two, and it's giving 40 gig for Linux Mint. If I want, I can take this spacer bar and drag it to the left and give Linux Mint some more space, or I can drag it to the right and give Mint less space. When I started off, I think I was giving Mint about 20 gig, and that used to work just fine. Now I've got bigger hard drives. This is actually a good starting point, because remember, you can always change the size of partitions later on, should you need to do so. But 40 gig is a pretty good size of partition. I think Linux needs about 16 gig, so you've still got 20, 24 or some 20 some gig absolutely free. So by default, we'll just choose the default operation and let it run. So we just say install now down here. So now it says, where are you? So what you have to realize now is it doesn't care where you are. What it really wants to know is, what time zone are you in? So in my case, it's defaulting to Toronto, which is 5 hours to the west of me. But there is no option for Ottawa, so it's pointless looking for Ottawa. And also Toronto is in Eastern time zone. So that's all it wants to know. It's in the Eastern time zone, so I can just say continue. And Ohio's in that time zone too, so it will find some city in the US probably, which is close enough and puts you in the ballpark. So the next screen we want to look at, there are some intermediate things here which are obvious, so we don't need to worry about them. But this one we need to think about a little bit. It wants to know who we are. Most of these entry fields, we can put just about anything we want. And there's really one caveat, is that when you choose a username, the logon username right here, it has to start with a lowercase letter. If you put an uppercase letter, it complains these days. I gave a presentation one time, and I used a friend's laptop, and I told it the username was capital J for John. And then I carried on. And what I didn't realize was that the installer had automatically changed capital J to lowercase j. So when I came to do my demo at the end, to reboot the computer, I found I couldn't log in because I thought the username was capital J and it actually wasn't. These days, it will complain if you try and give it the uppercase letter. So you need a lowercase letter there. And I just give it a password. This must be password or something like that. I just use a simple password because I don't really worry too much about people being able to access my hardware and log on instead of me. So I give it a name, I give it a computer's name. Username and password are important as the login credentials, although you really only need the password. It remembers the username. And I use the log in automatically. I leave that off, and I leave require my password to log in. I leave that checked, and I don't bother with encrypting my home folder. So all I do is make sure I can enter a password to log in. So then you just say, off you go, carry on. And it will go through its installation procedures, show you some pretty pictures on the way, and eventually, maybe 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever, it will say it's finished. You can continue your testing, or you can do a restart now, and then it will bring up that grub menu, and you can choose between Linux and Windows in your dual boot mode. Okay, so now we have our Linux actually working. We can take a look at what we actually have available. So we go to the main menu here, and we can see that on the left, we've got a whole raft of different categories. And the ones we have are accessories and graphics, so image editing type programs, browsers, email programs, an Office suite, sound and video players, and then some administration tools, some preferences that you can set, disk storage locations, and once you've used the program for a while, then you'll have a list of recent files that are available to you. So when you choose a particular category, let's say we click on Office here, then you see all the different options, all the different apps that are available. And the Office package that comes installed with Mint is LibreOffice. And LibreOffice has Writer, which is like Microsoft Word. It has Calc, which is like Microsoft Excel. And it has Impress, which is like Microsoft PowerPoint. And it also has a drawing package, which doesn't have a companion option in Office, in Microsoft Office. There's a couple of other options up here. There's a calendar, so if you use a daily calendar, then you can do that. And library is, I think, a list of previously used files. And so if we run Writer and pull up that docx file again, notice here I've pulled up a USB share.docx, which is this is that newsletter article that I was editing earlier in Linux in Word. Now I'm running it in LibreOffice, and you notice that it looks pretty much the same. I've got titles which are bold-faced and centered. I've got text. I've got a diagram or an image. So Writer is very much compatible with Microsoft Word. Now, the LibreOffice suite isn't 100% compatible, but it's pretty good. And if you've been using LibreOffice in Windows, then LibreOffice in Linux is essentially the same. Again, there might be some small differences, but they're very, very similar. If we're looking at, for example, the internet options, you've probably heard about Firefox, the web browser, and you may use Thunderbird email as an email client. Both of those are available for Windows, and I use them on multiple platforms. So a lot of this is all, these are all applications which are built in to the distro. These are the pre-installed applications that come with the Linux distribution. So you get the operating system like Windows, and you get all these applications, which are a lot of our third-party type apps, which are available and installed as part of the distro. One of the things I really like about Linux is the way that it does updates. And remember we talked about the panel or the taskbar in Windows. If you go to the very far right end of that panel, you'll find a bunch of icons. And one of them is this little shield. And when there's an orange dot on the shield, it means that updates are available to you. And the neat thing about Linux is that updates are completely in your control. And nothing happens until you double click on this icon and run the update manager. And when you do that, there are three categories of updates. You get security patches, you get updates to the kernel, and you can have updates to the installed software applications. And they all have different icons, a shield, a lightning bolt, or an up arrow. And while you can select which ones you want, not only can you decide when you want to do it, but you can decide which updates you want to actually implement. So you can disable updates if you don't want to implement them. Personally, everything comes checked by default, and I just let it run. I install everything by default. So here's an example. Here is an update, which is a security update. So it's a security thing for WPA. Here is a kernel update, that lightning bolt. So there's a new kernel available for the Linux operating system. And here is a up arrow, which means that this is a application which is to be updated. And just note here that I've got 104 updates available and they're 963 megabytes. Now, the reason there's so many and the updates are so big is that this is updating the system immediately after doing a fresh install. So the actual ISO file may be weeks out of date, and these are all the updates to the system that are required after the fresh install. So we can say, carry on, install those. And when we do that, we may see a system like this, where it says this upgrade, and typically when you've got a kernel, you get a bunch of additional packages that have to be installed. So it gives you a whole bunch of headers and Python things here. Again, just accept them by default. It knows what it's doing. Just say OK and let it rip. This is a much more common scenario for updating Linux. And once you've been running the system for a while, the updates are quite frequent, not necessarily daily, but certainly several times a week. But it's likely to be very few updates, one to 5 updates, let's say, and just a few megabytes. And again, you just say, install the updates right here, and 17 seconds later, the update process is being completed. So I really prefer that to Windows updates, where Windows is always kicking in when you don't want it to. This one, nothing happens until you decide. So you can do the updates when you want to actually update the system. And certainly if it's got 900 megabytes of updates, you're going to do that when you've left for dinner or overnight or something, when you've got lots of time, basically. You're not forced to sit there and watch the thing happen before you can use your computer again. In terms of installing additional software, you're not limited to just the software that comes with the distribution. There's all kinds of software available. However, unlike Windows, where almost everything is third party, and you can go running around the internet and find all kinds of different websites that are offering you applications, and you have to worry about whether they're all secure or not, whether they contain malware. Typically, Linux has curated applications. So the applications are available in software repositories, which are maintained by the Linux developers and maintained so that these applications are secure. You can install them in various ways. Most of the time, you will use an application which comes with the distribution, which is called the software manager. It's a GUI, so it's really easy to use. And if the package that you want is available in the repository, this is by far the easiest way to install the package. some packages aren't included in these repositories, so you do go to a third-party site, and you may, for Mint, it's based on Debian, so you're looking for a .deb file, a Debian software package, which is a special kind of archive, which you can install, again, very easily, but you have to go looking for these things and install them yourself, essentially. And then finally, this is one area where you may have to resort to the terminal and type in some commands. And this is very, I would say this is very rare. And when I do run into this, the people who are the developer of the application usually gives you detailed instructions on which commands to use, so that you can basically just cut and paste them into the terminal and run them one by one to do the installation. So it's actually very easy, and it's using the terminal is probably much less frequent than either of these other two. So we go to the menu. We could find it in the administration or preferences or accessories or something, but on the left-hand side here is a bunch of favorites. And one of the favorites is, this is Firefox, but this waffle type menu here is actually the software manager. If I were to click on that, then it would load the software manager. And the software manager gives you all kinds of ways of finding programs. It gives you some featured applications here. So for example, I could click on this tile here to load VLC. I can choose these various categories. So I've got, if I want new fonts or graphics programs, or if I want VLC, I might look under sound and video and pull up all the available applications in that category. Or alternatively, you notice up here, there's a search bar. So I could click on that and enter VLC. It will do a search and it will find VLC. It will tell me about it, the version number, and some reviews. Gets what, 4.5 stars out of 5. Lots of people like this program. And Software Manager has this install button, so I basically just click on that, and it will install the software. Again, here's where it needs some extra packages to fulfill dependencies for this program. I don't even think about this. I just say continue, and it installs the program. And it has a launch application here. And notice also, if you want to, you get tired with VLC, or you find a better mousetrap for a audio-video recorder player, then you can always just remove VLC and install something else. Very easy to install and remove software. Rather than just launching it, you notice that it automatically, the installation program, installed a menu item for VLC Media Player in the sound and video category. So if I were to click on that, then it would load VLC, and here I'm running an audio file. This is actually my club president, Chris Taylor, giving some kind of presentation and an audio recording, so I'm following along. So very easy to install and run programs that are not available directly in the distro. They're all available in the software repositories. Now, what about those Windows programs? Windows is a problem. Windows is a closed system. It's proprietary. You have to buy Windows. I mean, it comes with your computer, but there's a license fee involved in that. So you're actually buying a license to run Windows. And Windows, Microsoft doesn't release the code. So what happened was that Linux developers have basically reverse engineered Windows application program interface calls and created a compatibility layer where Wine, this so-called Wine, basically converts the Windows calls into the Linux equivalents, which is a system called POSIX, which came from the Unix world. these Unix and Linux people are kind of weird. They love their acronyms. And you notice that wine, and it's a kind of a recursive acronym, or maybe this isn't a recursive one, but it's an acronym. It says wine, WI, is not an emulator. So they say it's a compatibility layer, but as far as we're concerned, it emulates Windows and runs Windows programs on Linux, but it's actually not an emulator. The other thing I mentioned was Play on Linux. So if you go to the Play on Linux site, this is one of those third-party ones where you can actually download it and install it. So if you run Play on Linux and you look for, in the search bar here, we look for Office, you find that there's a whole bunch of Office programs that it will run. However, it doesn't run them all. It runs Office 2010, which is good because that's the version that I have. It runs 2013 and 2016, but at the time of this one, it didn't have 2019, 2021, any of the newer ones, and I don't know whether they're supported or not. So Windows programs, you have to choose, you have to find whether your particular Windows program is supported by Wine or by Play on Linux. This is actually quite an easy way to install Microsoft Office. So here I can choose 2010 and install. And note that this is not a free version of Microsoft Office. You have to have the Office software available, and you have to have the activation code, the Microsoft product key. So as part of the installation under Play on Linux, it will ask you for your product key, and you need to cut and paste or type that key into this field here in order to install it. But after that, you just let it run, and it says it's been installed and it's been installed successfully. And here on the desktop, you can see it's installed all the various modules that came with Office 2010. And here is Word and Excel and PowerPoint. And so I can run these programs on the Linux desktop, which is how I showed you earlier. I was doing that. So here, for example, this is PowerPoint running on the Linux desktop, right? There's the Linux Mint Start menu. This is PowerPoint with one of our My Club's Q&A sessions, which we run every week. And my co-host, Chris Taylor, the club president, he's a Windows freak, right? He's a Windows fanatic. So we have to do everything in Windows. We have to do it in PowerPoint, which is why I actually need to run PowerPoint in Linux. So I can keep pace with the PowerPoint sessions. Anyway, if you have the right version of Windows programs, you can run them in Linux. And if you can't, then you can dual boot into Windows and run it directly into Windows. So I said earlier, you kind of get the best of both worlds. So, to summarize, Windows 10 is going to reach end of life, which means there's going to be no support after October the 14th of this year. So you have 4 months to think about what you're going to do, because Windows 10 continues on its merry way. You get security patches every month, as usual, until this end of life. Then once you hit end of life, then you have to decide what you're going to do. If your computer will upgrade to Windows 11, then certainly upgrade to Windows 11. You can keep using Windows 10, but you have to take the risks involved with that. Personally, I don't recommend that. You can buy the extended support from Microsoft, but again, that's what, $27 US out of the window, or at least it gives you 1 year of breathing space, and then you're back to square one as of October 2026. You need to figure out what to do. You can try that third-party extended support on an annual basis, and you know, your bet is as good as mine how well that's going to work. And you can certainly buy a new computer, but then you have to decide to shell out the money to do that. And what are you going to do with the old machine? You could still install Linux on it and run it as a second computer. Or you could do what I'm suggesting is just trade up to Linux and either go the whole hog and switch to Linux completely, or hedge your bets, which is what I'm going to do because I need that Windows capabilities every now and again. So I'm going to do that running the dual boot system. I'll use Linux most of the time. I'll boot into Windows when I need to, and I'll disable the internet access so that I'm running Windows essentially securely offline. Okay, so that's everything I have. I don't see any questions in the chat. I answered the question on the fly. If anybody has any other questions, now is the time to ask them.
Yes, thank you, Alan. We really appreciate you being here.
Finally, I'll just mention again that the presentation's available. My email address if you don't have questions right now, but you think of things later. And John has the file, he can send it to you. So standing by, has anybody got any questions?
If you're online, you just need to unmute yourself and ask a question. If you're in the building, go over towards Everett and Mike, and so we can hear you. Mike Mickelson.
Okay, I have a question about stored files with in a dual boot system. For example, if I have some files stored through Windows, is it possible for me to access those files if I'm in Linux?
Absolutely.
So what's the compatibility of the file storage?
Absolutely. The thing is that Linux can see Windows files, but Windows refuses to see Linux partitions.
Okay.
So when you're in Linux, you can access the C drive if that's where you've stored your files. Personally, I actually use a third partition, a third kind of live partition, if you like. So I have the Windows drive, which is my C drive. I have my Linux drive, which is my operating system and all the installed applications. And I have a third partition, which I use as a dedicated data drive. So all of my data files, all my personal files, spreadsheets, word processing files, photographs, videos, they all sit on this data drive, which in Windows just shows up as drive D. So I have Windows C, which is the operating system. I have Windows D, which is my data drive. In Linux, I have the operating system. And then in Linux, the data drive shows up as a data disk mount point. And I use a file system table. I use a command in the file system table to mount the data drive every time I run Linux. So the data drive sits there and is accessible by Linux. So if I'm in Windows, I see all my data as drive D. If I'm in Linux, I see exactly the same files on my data disk partition.
Thank you.
I have a question related to that. What do you think about storing files in the cloud for storage, maybe Google, that can be accessed by both operating systems?
Yeah, that's another possibility. Personally, I don't do that. I don't really trust cloud services to store my data, all my data.
Okay.
It takes a long time to upload stuff. It's quicker to download it. But I like my files on my system. So I'm much happier to have my data drive local to my system, and I have all kinds of backups of it. However, I do use cloud storage, but only for transfer. So if I want to send you a big file or multiple digital photographs, I would store them on, say, Dropbox or Google Drive, and then send you the link, and you could download them, and then I delete them later on. So I use the cloud storage as a transfer mechanism. But certainly, if that's what you want to do, you want to access your files from the cloud, then both Windows and Linux can access the same cloud storage device.
Yeah, good question. And I would even say if you're going from Windows to Linux because of Windows 10 end of life, you're probably not going to be using both operating systems unless unless you already have a Windows 11 machine. Otherwise, you'd be having to use Linux plus one of the other solutions that were already mentioned. So usually if you're going to Linux, you want to take the leap, just from my experience.
Yeah, my experience is the opposite. I've always maintained dual boot systems, mainly because I have one program. I have one program for which there is no Linux version, and it will not install and run on Linux. And it's a proprietary program. It's a very niche type product. It's never going to be converted to Windows, but if I want to run it, I have to have Windows available.
Yeah, if you don't have specific hardware requirements for that software, I would probably run it inside a Windows virtual machine,
Yeah, and that's another way to do it, but for me, I've always used dual boot systems, and I just boot into Windows. With solid state drives these days, it boots in like 15, 20 seconds. So
Yeah.
I can just boot from one to the other really quickly and then back again. It's not an issue for me.
So are you running Windows 11 on any of your devices that don't officially support it?
No, I'm not interested in Windows 11. I'm not
Okay.
interested in Windows,
version,
honestly.
what version are you running
Of
Windows?
Windows 10.
Oh, okay. Nice. All right, I was just curious. All right, anyone else have any questions?
I don't feel
Thank you
smart
again,
enough
Alan, for
to
being
ask
here.
questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mary Frances said she doesn't feel smart enough to ask questions.
Oh, okay. Well, that's not a question. That's more of a comment, but we'll let it slide. Just kidding.
I just like to say thank Alan for a very detailed presentation, a very helpful one. Thank you very much.
You're
I
welcome.
agree. Thank you, Alan.
Nice to see everyone. Glad to be of assistance.
All right, everyone. Our next program meeting will be August 17th. I'll be presenting topic to be determined. If anyone has any good ideas for a topic, send me an email. And or if you don't know how to contact me, send it to someone you do know that knows how to contact me, and we'll consider that for the next program meeting topic. But Alan, thanks again. Everyone, have a great evening.
Bye, everyone.
Gonna stop
Thanks, all.
recording.
Okay.